Hello, everybody. My name is Brett Hare, and I'm here to thank you all today for joining us for the third episode of Summit Speaks, which is brought to you by the Other Fellow First Foundation. The Other Fellow First Foundation is a small local charity headquartered at the Summit Diner and exists to help Summit families in distress by assisting them with financial help at times in their lives when medical emergencies or funerals or unexpected problems in their lives show up and there's no other place to turn. The YMCA, the United Way, the Red Cross, they're all great organizations, but they're large, and unfortunately, a lot of local problems slip through the cracks. That's why we exist. We've been around for about 25 years. We'll be 25 next year. And during that period of time, we've raised and given away about $7 million. What is Summit Speaks? It's an Other Fellow First Foundation idea that attempts to highlight the truly remarkable people of our community so that our audience might have a chance to get to know them. Summit's a little city with a big heart. Our goal is to showcase some of these remarkable folks who define our city. Over a period of time, each year, we try to do 5 or 6 of these interviews so that archived on our website, after a period of time, there's 25 or 30 interesting interviews that'll give you an insight into the town in which you live. This afternoon, we're fortunate to have my friend Linda Flanagan join us. Linda just released a new book, the subject of which deals with youth sports in our community and in our country today. The title of the book is Take Back the Game. Linda is a freelance journalist, former cross-country track coach, a graduate of Lehigh University, holds a master's degree from Oxford University and the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, and was an analyst for the National Security Program at Harvard University. She's also a founding member of the New York City chapter of the Positive Coaching Alliance, a contributor to Project Play at the Aspen Institute, and a regular writer for NPR's educational site, Mindshift. Her columns on sports have appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, and Runner's World, and she is currently co-producing a documentary service on mental health and collegiate women athletes. Linda lives in Summit. She's a lifelong athlete and lives with her unstoppable husband, Bob, and a small menagerie of pets. She's still floating over Malcolm Gladwell's recent assertion that Linda's book, Take Back the Game, was one of his favorite books last year. So with that as an introduction, I'd like to thank and welcome Linda for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And Linda, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions that sort of surface the topic of your book in a general way, and then perhaps get into some specifics later. But we live in a very divided community, a very divided country today. There's all sorts of headlines that are very captivating that deal with international problems or fires in New Jersey or hurricanes in North Carolina. Why should anybody today really be paying a lot of attention to youth sports?
Well, I had that thought many times when I was writing the book because I got the book deal right before the pandemic. And, I sat alone in my office writing about participation rates and whatnot. And meanwhile, it seemed like the whole world is collapsing. So I've thought about that some. And I think that there's a lot of reasons why it still matters. It matters a lot, in some ways more than ever. First is that they're enduring. Youth sports, people are going to keep playing. Kids are going to keep playing. They're an increasingly large part of kids' lives. So, we have to go about our daily lives, and youth sports are a part of them. So that's one, even though, all hell is breaking loose elsewhere, it's still a part of daily life. The second is that sports for kids are incredibly important for both physical health and mental health. I mean, physically, we have an obesity problem. Exercise is a way to reduce that. Regular movement, not so much sports necessarily, but exercise reduces the body mass index. It helps cardiovascular health. So, newsflash, sports are good for your health, But at the moment, we have a mental health crisis. And I think for that reason alone, we need to be thinking more about how we're managing and delivering sports to kids because, according to the Surgeon General, adolescent mental health is the decisive crisis of our time. And all the data bears that out. So we also know that sports mitigate some of the worst features of mental illness. Depression and anxiety are the two big ones that are hurting kids now. And exercise relieves those. So we need to find, all kinds of studies have made this very clear. It's kind of indisputable. And if you read the New York Times, it's in the science section every Tuesday. So we need to find ways to get more kids moving. And so despite all the things that are happening in the world and in the country, it's very relevant to our lives today, where we live here in Summit. Another reason is because sports are, while classroom learning, of course, is terribly important, sports provide another way of reaching kids, these kids who are often anxious and struggling in their own way. Sports are a unique way to reach those kids because they tap into what's happening in a teenage brain, which is the teenage brain is acutely conscious of social activities, being with kids, and they're very emotional. And sports provide both teammates and a highly emotional setting. So this is a great way for sports provide an outlet for kids that is especially meaningful to them. And, for anyone who played sports growing up, I think it's something we always think back to. And we can remember aspects of our athletic careers, whereas we wouldn't necessarily remember a random chemistry class or, history class, because those memories are they stick with you. They're emotional and they leave an impact. So sports, bring young people together. They have this shared environment, the shared suffering, the shared outcome, the shared goal. And that has a very meaningful impact on kids. And finally, not to go overboard, but they're so important for a community like Summit. Now, especially given how fractious the times are, community sports bring people together. They bring kids together from different neighborhoods, and they bring adults together. And they're a wonderful way to get to know your neighbors in a usually benign setting.
Interesting. If you could share some thoughts about how youth sports has changed from a generation ago, where today, I believe in your book, it's become a business, a $30 billion a year business, and how that has changed life in the towns that you researched and the country in general. Could you talk to that a little bit?
Yes. So youth sports used to be child-driven, for recreation, fun, and kind of organized by kids. Now they are adult-centered. They're geared towards developing specific skills, and they're organized and managed by adults. So it's a completely different kind of setting. One was play-based, and the other is organized and controlled by adults. Anyone has children knows that it's a business, and there's all kinds of reasons for that, starting with the decline in support for public sports options, like that you might have at the rec center or at Memorial Field here in Summit. There's just across the country, there's been a decline in spending for those opportunities. And as happens in our country, private groups have tried to fill that gap. At the same time, we've had Title IX being enforced in the 90s, which brought more girls into sports, which is great. But it's just shifted towards a privatized model. And then it really took off after Disney built its Wide World Sports Complex in 1997, because then it was like, wow, they suddenly realized that parents will flock here to watch their kids play. So that just set off a whole kind of arms race of building these sports complexes all over the country in order to build the tax base. And the effect of that is that it's moved youth sports away from kids to adults. They're really very much adult-centered, although in theory they're for kids. It's adults who are kind of reaping a lot of the benefits. Certainly they're reaping the monetary benefits of it. And just this past year, in March of this year, two big hedge fund guys, David Blitzer and Josh Harris, started a company called Unrivaled. And these are private equity guys who bought up a whole lot of little youth sports organizations, and big ones too, I should say. It's actually bigger ones like Cal Ripken and Cooperstown and Shaun White's complexes. And, they're optimistic about generating more income out of youth sports. And that is the future of youth sports: greater privatization, more expense, more, more. That's already been more. But I just have to share one quote by the guy who runs. His name is Andy Campion. He runs the Unrivaled company that is buying up these youth sports organizations. He said, "There is almost an insatiable demand for youth sports experiences. What exists today is a fraction of what we think the potential is." So if they believe that, where is that coming from? It's coming from communities like Summit, where people have the means and they want to see their kids do well, and there's just going to be more opportunities to open your wallet.
So along those lines, you've done a lot of research on this subject. Could you speak to what it costs to have a family, say you get 3 or 4 kids, and you want one daughter who might be particularly interested in lacrosse, another one might be interested in soccer, or a son who plays hockey. Mm-hmm. How expensive is this, and how many families as a percentage of the population can afford this?
Well, that's it's going, as you would imagine, only the middle and upper middle classes can truly afford some of these sports, like ice hockey, which is the most expensive. But the Aspen Institute found that parents spent $30 to $40 billion a year, and it's a little vague. It's a large gap in that, between, that's $10 billion that's not nailed down, because it is really hard to get truly accurate data, because there's no central organizing body that's like collecting it. But that's their best guess. $30 to $40 billion a year parents are spending. When you break it down to look at families, a 2019 survey of parents who had kids in club programs, so like all the parents here, or many of the parents here, 27% spent at least $500 a month on their kids' athletics. 19% spent at least 20 hours a week on their kids' sports. So it's a massive investment of both time and money that parents are putting into this. And there are other costs as well. I mean, it's not just what you pay and what you give with your time, it's what you're giving up.
Yeah.
Family life.
Dinners,
vacations. In that study, 36% of families cut back on family vacations because of youth sports. And obviously some families, they turn their youth sports trip into the vacation. But, it does have an impact on other kids in the family who may not be playing sports. And it can have an effect on, if the couple is married, on how they spend their time. I'm sure everyone who lives here knows of this dividing and conquering, where one kid goes to, or one parent takes the kid to Connecticut and the other one goes to Virginia, because they've got competing tournaments to attend. So it leads to this chaotic kind of day-to-day life that revolves around sports. And, you know, I don't know if you saw this, but in August, the Surgeon General came out with an advisory that called attention to the mental health problems of parents because they're so burdened they feel so much weight and pressure from all that is expected of them. And not just sports, but sports is a big part of it, especially if, all your kids are playing. Parents are spending more time with their kids. They feel obliged to. They're very anxious about how they're going to manage in this winner-take-all economy. So it's just a really stressful time for parents and kids because it's so intense and relentless.
So is it possible that one of the motivating forces behind this is that if you spend as a family and make a big investment in your child when he's starting at, say, age 6, 7, and 8 in a sport that will allow him to, or her, to become proficient to the point where getting into a college that plays Division I sports, specifically, say, an Ivy League college, where being able to say that in applying to a school, you bring a particular skill that you don't develop in Nebraska because they don't play, say, lacrosse in Nebraska, but they do in Darien, Connecticut, they do in Summit, New Jersey. Is that a motivating part of this as well?
I mean, sports are kind of being gamed in order to get kids into better colleges than they might otherwise get into. And we saw this with Varsity Blues, obviously, where, parents were blatantly cheating to drum up fake statistics about their kids' athletic ability so that the coaches would vouch for them. But, what's the fallacy of that logic is that a very small number of kids even go on to play in college. It's 6 to 7% of high school athletes, not the whole high school students, high school athletes. 2% get any kind of scholarship money. 2%. And 0.3% get a full ride. And that's really pretty much in football and basketball.
So you're chasing fool's gold.
You'd be much better off putting that money in an index fund and just letting it accumulate. And, maybe get your kid a tutor for math or English or whatever their weakness is academically, because there's also a lot of scholarship aid for academics. But, there's an allure of the top colleges and the prestige that's associated with going and being recruited, never mind how the actual experience plays out, because I think it's a big wake-up call for a lot of kids when they get to college. Those who play, especially at Division I level, it's a full-time job.
So one of my last questions. I grew up in Summit, or my kids grew up in Summit. I thought they had a pretty full and healthy athletic opportunity. What I see today, and reading your book just confirms it, we're kind of over the top with this fascination with youth sports. And I'm curious, from your perspective and point of view, what sort of brings us back from the precipice here? Is there some sort of a 9/11 event that we need to kind of curtail this? Or is the quote from the private equity guy right, and that we're just in the third inning of what is going to become even more over the top?
Well, I am hopeful that parents will reclaim their lives and recognize that it's neither in their own interest or their kids' interest to do this, starting at really young ages. That all the sports medicine people, all those who are most immersed in the research will tell you early specialization in sport is a terrible idea. The best athletes play multi-sports, that you actually have little control over your child's athletic ability. I mean, they have to want it, they have to develop. It's not something you can, enforce on them. it will collapse under its own weight. So, I'm hopeful that parents will kind of come around and recognize, get a little educated on what this, the reality of the current model, which is just not conducive to health and well-being, and reject it and go back to all for sports, having local sports. Certainly the very best should play club if they want to, but the idea that everybody has to do this is not helpful to anybody. And I'm hopeful that with a little education, parents will recognize that and, think twice.
So, Linda, the book, I'm sure, was a labor of love and preoccupied you for quite a while. What's your next project? What are you working on now?
Well, now I am working on a documentary series on collegiate women athlete mental health. It may be unknown to many people, but there's a giant gap between collegiate men and collegiate women athletes in their emotional well-being, basically. The women are a lot more miserable. They're anxious, they're depressed, they're overwhelmed at much higher rates. Almost 50% of the Division III level girls feel that way, or young women. And a team of researchers and I, based in Philadelphia, are interviewing a lot of current athletes, former athletes, experts, medical experts, policy wonks, and others who can talk about why this is happening, what we can do about it, and to kind of there's this great appreciation for women's sports now, the Caitlin Clark effect, and we saw how the women did in the U.S. women did in the Olympics this summer, and it was very exciting, and it's great. And we also need to be looking at how the women are experiencing this. Those who make it to the top, and those who never get there, but who are caught up in the system that can be very crushing. Because basically the male model of sports has been just glommed onto women. And it doesn't, women and men have different bodies and different physical needs and capacities, and that hasn't generally been recognized in the coaching that most women get. So our documentary we hope will open people's eyes to that and give them some perspective on how it can be improved.
So when might this documentary be finished, and how would the audience have an opportunity to enjoy it?
Well, I can't answer that yet because I'm not clear on it, but I can tell you that in January or February, sometime this winter, it's going to be aired on PBS in Pennsylvania, and then we hope to expand its audience to other PBS stations. And it'll be in 4 different segments. One is the college athlete, sort of an overview, the role of youth sports, Title IX, and then solutions.
Well, thank you, Linda, for sharing your thoughts and insights.
Thank you.
The purpose of this show is to provide the audience with an insight and an opportunity to get to know, even for just 20 minutes or so, some of the very interesting folks who live in this community. And our goal is to continue providing an insight like this, where conversationally some very interesting people like Linda, who's generous enough to share her time with me and the foundation, so that you might get a better sense of the community that you live in. So thanks very much. And again, Linda, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.